Hi, everyone, and welcome to this really exciting webinar that we have Phil Marshall with us. And we're going to be discussing everything about revolutionizing stadium connectivity in revolutionizing stadiums with connectivity and how network as a service solutions and products like CellStack can actually outperform traditional solutions like DAS and traditional private 5G, and particularly the work that we are doing with different stadiums and venues, and why does it really make sense to treat connectivity as an asset rather than a cost, and where do we see the opportunity for these places like stadiums and venues to actually make money and improve the user experience in their spaces. So, brief introduction about Weaver Labs. We are a telecommunications startup based in the UK, and we build CellStack, which is a telco cloud orchestration product, which essentially acts as a network as a service platform for these stadiums, where it incorporates all of the different applications that are given to these venues and stadiums, but also it automates the creation of 5G private networks, and it automates the deployment of any of these applications. So we partnered with Phil from Talaga Research to do a really interesting analysis on the return on investment after doing a full installation of a private network in a stadium. And we're going to be discussing the role of connectivity in stadiums and why it makes sense from stadium perspective to make such an investment, and where do we see the future of entertainment in this space. So Phil is the Chief Research Officer at Talaga Research, and he leads thought leadership initiatives and supports product development. Prior to founding Talaga in 2009, Phil served as the vice president at Yankee Group for 9 years, where he led its global service provider technology practice. He's also led management and engineering roles in Verizon International, Spark New Zealand, and BHP New Zealand Steel, and has over 30 years of experience in the ICT industry. Dr. Marshall has worked on projects in more than 40 countries and holds a PhD in electrical and electronic engineer, and is a senior member of the IEEE. Thank you, Phil, for joining us, and a few words about Talaga Research and your contribution to this.
Sure, thanks, Maria. Yeah, just a brief background on Talaga Research. We're industry analysts and consultants. A lot of the work we do is in and around analyzing industry trends, building economic models and market models to assess the nature of those trends and their prospects in the marketplace. So this was a really exciting study because we were getting right down to the nitty-gritty of what is the right thing to do as you move towards more advanced digital services in stadium environments. And if we look at the sort of the landscape for stadiums, they're really at a crossroads. It's no longer just about providing connectivity. It's not just about coverage. It's much more about the idea of getting beyond that into the types of experiences that you can provide the attendees in those stadiums, and the new revenue streams that are unlocked as a consequence of those. And really what this does is Maria, is it kind of aligns with the way in which digital services in general are developing. Things like artificial intelligence, extended reality, and so forth. So all of these capabilities we're interested in terms of how they're implemented in a stadium environment. And if you are to go down the path of implementing them in that environment, what does it mean from the perspective of the infrastructure that's needed? the way in which we can sort of look at it is to take a little bit further and say, well, what are those services? What are the services that show promise for stadium implementations? And this is sort of an example, right? These are use cases you might consider, which go all the. You're basically looking at the sort of the life cycle, if you like, of an attendee in a stadium, right from when they arrive, finding their way into the stadium, through the ticketing process, the types of services that they're going to be looking for while they're there, and the things you can do to enhance that experience, whether it be augmented reality type applications, embedding AI capabilities to provide enhanced insights, and so forth. And it's clear when you look at these types of entertainment events that there is quite a significant elasticity in spend, depending on the nature of the services that you're capable of providing, as well as it increases the venue's ability to support a greater range of services or events, I should say, more effectively. So that's really what the study was all about, and what we were, as I said before, most interested in was what does that mean from the standpoint of the underlying ecosystem that you need to support these use cases and ensure that the infrastructure investments that are being made align well, so that in the future they've sort of future proofed to be able to um, deliver these types of services.
There was one thing that we were discussing when we were setting out the assumptions for the study, and when we were at the very beginning, and I really like to pick this because you mentioned something really interesting, and it was about the competing motivations between mobile network
Hmm.
operators and the venues themselves, right? And
Right.
how the planning and the different solutions that were presented to the venue owners would satisfy maybe the mobile network operator needs and not necessarily their needs when serving all of these applications. And it was around the
Hmm.
churn versus the revenue generating. Would
Right.
you expand on that a little bit? Which
Yeah, for sure. So
the solutions, right? The solution space that we are discussing in this paper.
oh, absolutely. So if you think of the traditional solutions and what options were available in the past, I mean, you could go for an unlicensed type of solution, and indeed many, they have been adopted in many venues, or you would be pushed down a sort of a path in the past of requiring the support of a mobile operator, a mobile network operator. And what's interesting with the mobile network operators is that their business models don't quite align with what a stadium provider is necessarily looking for. Firstly, if you think of a mobile operator, they're very interested in mass market, high volume consumer services. So what tends to happen is they'll narrow in on services that offer sort of mass markets opportunity across their entire subscriber base. The other thing that does become a challenge as well is the whole notion of neutral host. So if you're going to put a solution into a stadium, you need to make sure that the platform is going to be compatible with all of the mobile phones that the different attendees bring to that stadium, which means you've got to support multiple mobile network operators, and you sort of end up with this neutral host that's very connectivity orientated and tends to be limited in terms of its ability to to adapt or be agile relative to the types of services that you're delivering. And I think what's the big change that we've seen has been the availability of private 5G and private networking in more reliable spectrum than your traditional unlicensed spectrum, And then extending beyond that to say, well, actually, the underlying infrastructure that you're deploying doesn't have to be the same as what a mobile operators would deploy, because it's not the mobile operators technology tends to be orientated towards legacy infrastructure migration, and the support of these sort of mass market consumer service offerings. So what we ended up in our study was to have these different scenarios as being sort of the basis upon which we could analyze, well, what does it mean as you start to migrate through these different levels of infrastructure maturity, with the maturity being very orientated towards what a stadium needs rather than necessarily what you'd be doing for a mass market consumer across a city landscape, so to speak.
So on the one end of the spectrum, obviously we have the MNO type of solution, and obviously it's the distributed antenna system, which we have two definitions of that. It's the off-net and the on-net.
Right.
Yes. And right now, I think there is a very healthy conversation happening in the industry where a lot of the venues are starting to be more educated around the different options that they can
Right.
implement. And there is a lot of confusion around what DAS is. Can you help us identify or define what off-net is and on-net is
Sure.
within the stadium context, and what are the differences between the two of them?
Right. So for a distributed distributed antenna system, to begin with, is you're putting in an antenna system that distributes the signal and provides coverage through the stadium, provides wireless coverage. The capacity can either come from a mobile operator's existing network, which, for all intents and purposes, if it's off net, would be operating outside of the stadium. So you'd be using capacity off their macro cells outside of the stadium to distribute the signal.
Which is a
Obviously,
repeater, essentially. It
it's
acts as
basically a
a
repeater,
yeah.
exactly. And then the other option, if you go on net, is that you bring the base station into the venue, and now you have a dedicated capacity for that venue.
Mm-hmm.
Then the question becomes the architecture behind that platform, and that architecture, if you're anchored to a mobile network operator, is going to be heavily dictated by the infrastructure that they've deployed in their macro network environment. And it's also going to be dictated by the fact that if you're offering a neutral host solution, that base station has to somehow be able to support the
All the
demands, or for the be able to support devices from different service providers. So that sort of gives you it's a repeater, so it's going to have less capacity. You'd bring it on net if you need more capacity, and obviously you've got this neutral host issue to contend with, if you're relying on a mobile network operator hosted solution.
And then
And
on the
that's
other
what,
side of the spectrum, we have the
yeah,
private network, right? Which
yeah,
means, okay, so now users are no longer connecting with their mobile phones using their traditional SIMs,
right.
and they connect into a private network. So which
Hmm.
ones are we considering as private networks in our study?
Well, what we're considering as private networks is well, we've got a few different architectures, but what we're considering firstly is the notion that the venue owner or a managed service provider would be managing that infrastructure, for all intents and purposes, independent of the mobile operator, and the device compatibility is with that private network that you've deployed on site.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first phase. And then the next phase is to say, well, okay, if you're doing that, then what can you do with the technology? Because now you manage it and now it's deployed it's bespoke technology deployed for the venue, and that leads you down a path of saying, well, we could start taking advantage of the Open RAN standardization. So, in other words, more advanced sort of agile compute infrastructure. And then we can start to take advantage of being able to more closely align the connectivity technology with your underlying service requirements, right? Where you can stitch the two together by bringing it, for example, an edge cloud and integrating them more tightly. So in other words, as you go down that path of private, you become more opportunities open up for you in terms of being able to make that infrastructure more compute like, and more agile and integrated into the services that you're offering. The benefits of that is you can get to market faster and have more flexibility to be able to deploy services that you either wouldn't be able to deploy on the conventional infrastructure, or if you were to try, it'd be expensive and take a long time to bring to market. So it increases your agility, and it's actually moving you further down the path in the direction that you need to be from a standpoint of infrastructure, if you're going to be creating an agile environment for deploying these advanced digital services. So it's that sort of evolutionary path that you find, and it'll, by going private, it allows you to push further down that, because you're not encumbered by the mobile network operators' own network requirements that are much broader than what you, and as I said, mass market, citywide, nationwide, as opposed to what you want specifically for your stadium.
And in terms of there is a component of service agility and scalability that we introduced in the study, and specifically we compare traditional or conventional private 5G, which is bespoke solution, end-to-end network given by a large vendor, and then we compare it with these so very agile and scalable solutions based on software like Open RAN and Edge Cloud, but it doesn't have to be Open RAN. I mean, Open RAN with the RIC can definitely help, but
right,
any virtual or software-based solution can definitely
yeah.
help. From your perspective, what makes a software-based, cloud-based solution different from a conventional private 5G in terms of scalability and service agility? And also, I can see here that you have the business case based on scalability and service agility for the different applications. So maybe we can get a little bit into that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the simplest way of thinking of it is how much of your infrastructure is anchored in terms of hardware dependency versus software dependency. And as you push it more towards a software dependency, you create an increased level of agility, and also too, if you're able to put it onto more commodity type hardware platforms, you drive that scalability, right? So it means you're more flexible in terms of the way in which your architecture is implemented. And what I would say is that obviously, mobile network operators are trying to go down that same path, but in an environment where you're trying to offer a wide range of digital services and there's a business case for them, you want to move down that path faster, and you're in an environment where you can, because you don't have all of these legacy infrastructure dependencies. You have an environment that is much more flexible and able to scale to meet the venue demands more effectively. So you can move down that path much more rapidly than you would if we were to think about it as a sort of an ordinary sort of wide area mobile network. And this particular chart is really what we did in the study is we said, well, what are the use cases that offer promise in terms of revenue opportunities for a venue owner, and how many of these services can they deploy for the different types of architectures that you have. And what you can see is, as you move from the sort of the off-net DAS, the repeater type architecture, through towards sort of conventional mobile network operator, sort of base station on site, through private 5G, and then out towards these more compute, like standardized compute platform architectures, or software-centric architectures, I should say. You can support more of those services, and you can deploy them more rapidly than you would have been able to otherwise.
And also, just I mean, us, we've integrated several services into these software platforms, and there is an element of integration that happened at a network level, so that these services can run smoothly. So, for instance, when we have a local cloud running an AI engine, or delivering insights and feeding from the video streams, the ability to have everything running in the same software platform and have messaging channels going back and forth between them, sharing APIs between them, it allows for the experience to be a lot more enriched. So, for instance, we've integrated 4 camera streams, and then the same camera streams that are given to the users in the app, they are also given to an AI engine that is correlating the images with internet data and other types of data, and generating real-time insights. So if we think about applications that exist in silos, and there is no single point of integration into the network, then all of these things become a lot more difficult to integrate.
Absolutely.
And I think that is a major difference when we compare to ready-made private 5G solutions that are not platform-based, because integration is a lot more difficult, because we don't have as much control of the network. And there is all of this conversation about network APIs and how we're going to be using network APIs to offer a more enriched application ecosystem. But by the time that the industry aligns on the APIs, the application ecosystem would have found a way around it, and we're not going to need them anymore, right? So software-based platforms provide this agility because it is easier to integrate, essentially, right?
Absolutely. And those functions become ever more, the network functions that you're talking about become increasingly important as the services become more and more sophisticated. So you want to be able to do that, and in some cases you kind of have to do that for it to work. And your point about silos is important, because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to eliminate as best we can as many of those silos as possible, because we know that whenever you have these silos, they create inefficiencies, and it sort of doesn't make sense to implement silos based on sort of legacy solutions such as mobile network operators environments into a stadium just because that's how the mobile network operator's done it. And I think you could take advantage, and I think what the strategy here is you accelerate down a path that you know that the industry is going to go, and you've got a more contained environment, so you can do it more rapidly and more efficiently, so you can take advantage of these opportunities at a much faster pace than you would do if you were sort of managing 30 or 40,000 cell sites in a network. So absolutely. And I think that's the direction where we're trying to take the industry. If you look at what happened with digital services when the kind of mobile internet emerged, all the value was sort of pushed to the peripheries, to the cloud and to the device, and the network was commoditized. But what we're seeing now is those services become more advanced. We've seen the value go back into that network, and that's basically what you're taking advantage of, because, well, you need to take advantage of to be able to make these services work effectively.
Exactly. Cool. Do you want to get a little bit into the
This one.
actual nitty gritty of
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we can kind of talk ourselves blue in the face in terms of the opportunities are there. The question is, how much does it cost? What services are you likely to deliver? I mean, does it scale? Does it really support innovation? And ultimately, is it profitable? And so what we put together for the study was a model that characterized sort of a case study stadium to investigate these issues, and to try and identify what were the levers that you can pull as a venue owner to really capitalize on the opportunities with connectivity infrastructure. If you go beyond just saying we're trying to provide coverage, if you go beyond and say, actually, we're building a digital platform here, how do we build that digital platform with connectivity to be able to capitalize on opportunities that we believe are out there? And really, you can think of it as kind of from a revenue standpoint and a value creation standpoint. There were sort of three things we looked into. The first, and well, not necessarily in order of priority, but the first is the fact that the rate at which you can, your time to value, the rate at which you can deploy services in an agile environment is much faster. And being able to do that means that you can get those services out there sooner and more cost effectively. And also too, if your venue's being used for different types of activities, whether it's a rock concert or it's a soccer uh, or football, I should say, game, or rugby, or whatever it's being used for, that you can adapt. You can adapt the environment to support that. So the time to value was important. Obviously, the value of the advanced services themselves. On that earlier chart, you could kind of see if you haven't moved towards an infrastructure that's scalable and agile, you're sort of limited in terms of being able to offer some of these services, because you don't have that level of integration that you were talking about, Maria, right? You haven't got the integration in the environment to be able to do some of these advanced services. And then the third area was obviously the ability to create a competitive advantage. And what that means is that your venue is more likely to be favored over other venues because you've got the infrastructure and the digital environment, the digital ecosystem that can support the services that are valuable to the people who are running events there. So those were sort of, if you like, at a very, very high level, the three areas that we were interested in. And we put together a case study. So we took a case study stadium doing 50 annual events with an average of 20,000 attendees per event. And we sort of made assumptions in terms of how much revenue they were getting per attendee, as well as we obviously introduced, sort of the notion of having VIP attendees and how much revenues you're likely to get from them as well. Bearing in mind, if you do this infrastructure right, you can do really, really good segmentation down into targeting groups such as VIPs with more advanced services, and that's built into the model as well. The use cases that we presented on the earlier slide were analyzed. So we analyzed each of those use cases in terms of how much do they cost, how fast can you bring them to market with each of the solutions, what's to what extent can you actually deliver on the promise of that particular use case? In other words, can you actually deliver it with the infrastructure that you're deploying? And we had 5 network scenarios ranging all the way from the off-net distributed antenna system, so the kind of repeater architecture that you were talking about, Maria, all the way through to a network as a service orientated platform where you've integrated you've got a software centric network architecture that's integrated with your service enable environment. And the result of that, as we sort of went through those different cases and analyzed the net present value, was the net present value increase. So if you started with an off-net architecture, really what you're doing is you're just providing coverage. So there's not a lot of upside in terms of advanced digital services that you can offer, which means for that type of architecture, we were seeing about a 16.8 million in terms of net present value over a 5-year period, versus as you move to the right, you can see how, because you're taking advantage of those 3 factors, right? Faster time to market, the ability to garner more revenues from those services, and the ability to create a more competitive environment, the net present value went up, as did the monthly revenues per attendee, incremental revenues per attendee, and obviously the number of attendees, where we're basically saying you've got a more competitive venue. People want to go there because there are these advanced digital services that really improve the experience. And so what that meant was our model was really showing and demonstrating the benefit of pushing towards this more open RAN or software radio type environment with an integrated edge cloud, as being something that is offers a lot more financial value relative to the other solutions, and recognizing the nature of the environment that's being deployed, that the opportunity to be able to accelerate innovation in the stadium environment is definitely there. If we
So
looked
here
at,
it's really interesting that we are really able to put numbers into what actually means scalability and agility, and what does it mean to be able to launch services faster, and
yeah,
the fact that it has a tangible factor influence in the revenue generation. It's very clear that
yeah, for sure, because on the one hand, you sort of say, okay, what services can we offer, and how advanced are they? Therefore, what do we think the upside revenue opportunity are for those services? As you push to a more agile infrastructure, the opportunity is larger.
yeah.
Then the other aspect of it is, if you've got a more agile infrastructure, the upfront requirements and the time to market is reduced, and that time to market is valuable as well, and that's what I was calling time to value, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
you can accelerate that, then you'll see an improvement in the net present value of your overall investment.
Mm-hmm.
The other aspect too is, and you know, we didn't model this explicitly, but it was certainly there, is that if you're shifting between different types of events that have different requirements in terms of the services that you're offering, that time to market becomes important as well.
Yeah.
And so the way we characterize that in the model was to make assumptions in terms of the incremental events that you'd be able to offer as a consequence of that, with sort of overlays with the competitive nature of your digital infrastructure. But definitely that speed to market is quite valuable in terms of the overall opportunity and from the standpoint of what we found from the financial modeling.
Which is really important for when we have conversations with stadiums, the off seasons. What do I do with it? And
Right,
how can this platform be good for a conference? Can this platform be also good for a concert?
right,
Not only my sports events. And it's an investment that can make these venues some hub of other revenue
right,
opportunities, and making them more attractive to other type of events rather than just staying on the one type, which is something that it's in the wish list of a lot of stadiums. How can we provide, how can we be
right.
attractive for other events as well? And this is platforms, software based platforms like this one actually help accelerate that, because uh, it becomes kind of like an app store where you can have different
Right.
applications, different services, and work with the different types of providers without too much integration work.
Absolutely. And what's interesting with it as well is if you go back 5 years and you predict what will be the services that people, are gravitating towards, it's actually very difficult to get it
Mm.
right. You just it's a bit, but what you need is you need this flexibility to be able to
Yeah.
adapt as the market kind of changes around you. So we identified 16 use cases, which really were just kind of looking at the life cycle of an attendee to an event and
Mm.
trying to best predict what are the sorts of things that they're going to do. But the reality is, there's going to be a whole load of other services and digital services that emerge that we haven't even thought of. And you need an agile infrastructure to be able to anticipate that. You don't want to get stuck with something that can't support those services. So I think that's the other aspect to it as well, in terms of that agility being really important, because we know all of these the digital and physical worlds and the convergence of those um, the convergence is changing rapidly, and stadiums are an important environment where that's going to occur. So they need to be ready.
And it's not only the use cases themselves, but also the different users of that
Right.
platform, right? Because you have obviously your fans that are going to use the connectivity, but you have
Hmm.
the operations team, the security team, the ticketing team, and all
Yeah.
of them will have different requirements and different applications. And maybe for a CRO or for a commercial officer, the 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 investment case is made through the fan engaging, right? Or the
Right.
hotel. It depends. Every venue has its own
Hmm.
story. But then there are other users that are going to be hopping into this network and would love to leverage the existing asset. And sometimes there are cases that if obviously you put in a DAS, you're not going to be able to provide a service internally to your operations team or to your
No.
team or to your contractors that are coming in, because that network is built with one purpose, which is capacity.
Right, right, and essentially that network is built to extend the outdoor macro
Yeah,
network into the stadiums so that
yeah.
people have cell phone coverage there. But that's not what you should be building it for. You should be building it as a digital infrastructure to be able to deliver digital services in that environment with an infrastructure that's capable of supporting the specific services that are going to be needed. And you're right in terms of the operational efficiencies, and it's something we did include in the model, in terms of how do you reduce some of the costs of some of the sort of how can you use digital services to lower your operational costs, as well. So each of the use cases that we've included, well, some of the use cases we included actually related directly to the operations, of the environment. It's also security, as well as things like payment systems, and making sure that they operate well and integrate well with the digital services that you're delivering. So absolutely, it's the whole operational side of it, and the operational reliability, operational efficiencies is an
Mm.
important part of that too. Um, what you can see here, actually, this shows you the revenue forecast that we had in the model, and really illustrates what we're saying, right? So if you look at the off dash, which is the very dark blue, the upside is, yes, there's some upside, so 1.8 to 3.2 uh, million pounds between over that 5-year period in terms of growth and revenues, annual revenues. Whereas what you can see with these other implementations, it kind of illustrates that point of being able to much more efficiently deliver, create that upside opportunity, so that when we get to kind of the fully fledged Open RAN private 5G solution with the integrated edge cloud, which I think you, Maria, you internally you would refer to that as network as a service. Is that,
Yeah.
am I right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you get to that level, we're almost tenfold in terms of revenues in the 5th year. So that's really, there are other ways in terms of operational efficiencies and cost savings and so forth. But it's the top line. It's the revenues that is driving a big part of that net present value that I showed on the earlier slide. And a
Mm.
kind of another way of looking at it is to look at it from the standpoint of your capex to revenue ratio. So in other words, how much capital you're putting in the ground versus the revenues that you're getting from that. And you can see again that the more advanced agile solution um, outperforms because your capital is more efficient.
Yeah, I see
The
that the colors are actually changed here. Now here the
Oh, we
dark
flipped the
blue is
colors.
open
Yeah,
RAN.
dark. Yeah. That's true. So we flip the colors, but
Yeah, flip the
read
colors,
the key.
but not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
so here the dark blue is the software base, which is the lower capital, and the capital to revenue. It's actually it's the
yeah.
larger capital investment for the DAS solution, which here is the light blue color. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
they've got reverse. But the point here is this is important in terms of capital efficiency. So how efficient is your capital? And it illustrates the fact that you're way more efficient as you go to these more advanced solutions, because you're able to drive more revenues out of that infrastructure. Um, and so it's more
yeah.
capital efficient. Um, and then I guess some final thoughts that sort of came out of the study. I mean, it's clear when you look at what's going on around the world in terms of digitization. Digitization is occurring everywhere, um, and so it really is showtime for advanced digital services in stadiums. um, you're capitalizing on all of these other activities, the proliferation of AI, the proliferation of AR, VR, the proliferation of advanced infrastructure capabilities that are software centric, and enable software centric platforms on relatively commoditized hardware, um, cloud computing, edge computing. So all of these things create this sort of broader ecosystem that means, from a stadium standpoint, it really is showtime. And I think we've talked, Maria, about the agile platforms and the distinct advantage. And as I said before, it's the variety of services, it's the speed at which you can deploy those services, and then, as we showed on the previous slide, the return on invested capital, the fact that the capital you're deploying is way more efficient in terms of
Yeah.
being able to deliver on that promise. And the last point, which we sort of started off with, was that the solutions for stadiums are different. And I think there's a tendency to sort of get wrapped up in what is happening with the mobile network operators. But I think it's really important to distinguish between what is needed in a stadium to deliver digital services and create a digital infrastructure versus what mobile network operators are contending with in the mass market environment, and making sure that the stadium infrastructure is built in a way that matches what the needs are for that stadium, rather than compromised by what mobile network operators are
Yeah.
contending with.
Which essentially, it doesn't mean that mobile network operators cannot provide solutions to stadiums.
Right.
It cannot be as an extension of the public network. It
That's
has
right.
to be with a more enterprise architecture
Yep.
that is based on cloud, and that it's platform based rather
Yep.
than extending a network. Because all these talk about the network slicing and how can we provide the services out of a slice of the network, it's all good, but it hasn't really happened. And it was a great concept, but ultimately, having one network that can deliver absolutely everything and the level of scalability that that platform needs to have is just not there yet in the public network. So having a
It
separate isolated network that
mm,
targets those needs and speaks specifically to the enterprise customer needs, it is absolutely necessary. And I think that is the message, rather than,
yeah.
MNOs
Yeah.
have nothing to do here. It's more that, yes, but not with a public network.
That's absolutely. It's the order of priorities, right?
Mm,
What do you need? What are the priorities for a stadium? What are the priorities for a mobile network operator? And you're absolutely right. I mean, a mobile network operator could offer these kinds of capabilities, and indeed, in the enterprise side of their businesses, in some cases, they are delivering on some of these requirements.
yeah.
But I think the point here is that um, when you're making technology decisions about what's deployed in the stadium, there's a potential you can get influenced by the technology decisions that are being made by the mobile network operators for their mass market priorities,
Yes, exactly.
and
Yeah.
and distinguishing between those is really important if you want to push down that path of agility and take advantage of these digital service opportunities.
Amazing. Phil, this has been work for me. It has been a great project to work together with you. I've learned so much. Um, and I think it has put some numbers into a vision that Weaver Labs we see for years and years and years coming together into the market. This is
Mm.
true for stadiums. This is true for every single vertical that exists using connectivity. And I just would like to conclude asking you a final question on your thoughts. And it's like, what really excites you more about this network as a service? What do you think is the most exciting element now that you've kind of become more familiar with it and the potential?
Well, I've sort of lived with telecom and mobile networks since 1G, and and it's like there's always been these promises that have come down the pike, um, and I think we're now at this point where a few things align, and particularly the software centricity, the agility with high performance network capabilities. And for me, that's exciting, because what I've seen in the past has been sort of a constraint in your ability to really deliver on that promise. And I sort of lived through the kind of period of time where all the value got stripped out of the network, if you like. The network became increasingly commoditized, and the value went to the peripheries, the
Yeah,
cloud, and the devices.
yeah,
And and what I see is it coming back. And to me, as a network guy, that's really, really exciting.
it's pretty cool, actually. I do agree
Mm.
with you.
Yeah.
Phil, thank you so much. I think
Thank you.
this is an incredibly great study that you have done, and I think we've been really lucky to work together with you. We will put the links to download the study. It's in a white paper, and yeah, just if you have any questions, you can pose your questions in the comments, and we will definitely try and answer all of them. And we will keep working on these, and we will keep being very vocal about how networks are becoming value-centric assets now.
That's great. Thanks, Maria. And I certainly appreciated the opportunity to work on the project. It's been a lot of fun. So it's been an interesting study.
Great. Well, and thank you everyone for joining us. And yeah, hopefully see you soon in another one. Bye.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.